want to be the best possible leader you can be? Do you want to be the leader your team truly deserves? Then you are in the right place. In this podcast, we share deeply personal stories of how successful leaders are powered by their purpose and anchored in their authenticity, how they connect who they are to how they lead and translate their purpose into everyday actions in good times and bad, at crossroads and crises, how they challenge status quo and existing paradigms and do different things differently. Mindful leadership is the greatest unlock for the future of work. Join us in reimagining the leadership of the future with me, your host, Shahana Banerjee, CEO of Just Human, on a mission to humanize the future of work. In this episode, we dive into all the questions you ever had about future of work but didn't know who to ask. Brian Elliott, co-founder of Future Forum, author and future of work expert, takes us on quite an adventure, challenging headlines and busting myths with data as we play fact or clickbait. Play along and see if you get it right. Brian, welcome. I am beyond thrilled to have you on our podcast today.
Shahana, it's so great to be here with you, and I'm so glad that we finally got a time and made it work.
Yeah.
It's great to see you.
Well, you are one of the most trusted voices in the whole future of work debate across the globe. Thousands of people stalk you online, as you can imagine. So I'm especially excited that our listeners get to hear from you today.
No, I appreciate that. And stalking, welcome. I mean, that sounds really odd for me to say it that way, but I love sharing what I'm learning.
The future of work has really turned into its own industry of sorts. There are millions. We are just inundated with millions of research papers, articles, studies coming at us all the time. Some of it is really great work at the cutting edge of future of work.
Yeah,
And some of it is pure clickbait, right? It's
that's
self-serving,
right.
non-evidence-based conclusions that don't move the conversation forward.
Yeah,
And so I think for a lot of leaders, it's hard to tell the difference. What
yeah,
is fact and what is clickbait? So
yep.
our first section, in your honor, and frankly, for all of our sanity, is our first ever fact versus clickbait. I'll take you through quotes that are either headlines or quotes by CEOs. And then, I'll toss it back to you for your insights.
That's
How
great.
does that
Sounds like
sound?
fun. Let's do it. I can only
Are
imagine.
you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So the first one, the work from anywhere era is over. We've seen this in headlines and CEO rants. It gives us the impression that like JP Morgan, UPS, BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, that everybody is rushing back to the office, right? That's
Yeah,
one
yeah,
impression. The
yeah,
second impression is that flexibility is on the decline, right?
yeah.
And the third impression, which is perhaps even more concerning, is that it seems to suggest that the views of managers and people are polarized on the future of work debate.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
help us, Brian. What's fact and what's clickbait here?
So the clickbait is that everybody is streaming back into the office, and that
Right.
the end of flexibility is here, right? That's pretty clearly false for a number of reasons that I can give you. I think underlying it though is some dangerous clickbait, because the polarizing statements are the ones that make headlines. And too often, one of the reasons why I like talking about this is too often executives don't see past and don't read past the headline,
Right.
right? They see the headlines fairly salacious, and the headlines like to point this out as like a battle between executives and employees, as if they're on two extremes of behavior. Most people and most executives are a heck of a lot closer, and have been for 3 years, than most people want to admit, right? Like on average, executives want to be in the office about 3 days a week. On average, employees want to be together with their team about 2 days a week. That's not the world's hugest distance, but it doesn't resolve in, great headlines. What's really going on, if you unpack it, is there are definitely some companies out there that are getting more stringent about their return to office policies. And sometimes that's pretty extreme, like the recent ones around UPS saying
Yeah.
5 days a week in the office. Usually, when it's that extreme, it's a company that's under fire from Wall Street, that is really struggling for a number of different reasons, most of which have nothing to do with whether or not people are in the office. But that return to office mandate that's hard-nosed kind of placates investors to some degree, right? It sounds like a CEO getting tough.
Right.
And if you've got activist investors as a CEO, that might be one way to sort of give them a little freebie, if you will. Unfortunately, there's plenty of evidence out there now that that actually destroys morale inside the company if you go that extreme. From a reality perspective, there's tons of data out there that says that we're basically flat as a pancake, as Nick Bloom has put it, right? If you look at the Castle Systems data, we've been varying between 48 and 52% of pre-pandemic office occupancy for a year and a half now. If you look at their peak day analysis, which they now do almost every week, the differences year on year are about a percentage point apart. It's not that terribly different. And the reason for that is you can look at things like the Flex Index data about company policies and see that there are actually more companies shifting away from full-time in office to some form of hybrid flexibility and
Right.
even fully flexible operations than there are companies going the other way around. Because for every executive out there that's saying, I want people back in the office, there's a couple of other executives that are saying, you go because I'm going to take away your talent, right? So it's really back to the fact that most executives are actually more concerned with their ability to attract, retain, and engage talented people
Yeah.
than they are whether or not their butts are in the seat on a 5 day a week, 4 day a week, and even 3 day a week basis.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is also probably a myth is that this is purely a knowledge worker phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I've heard you say this before that it's not. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, that's one of the big reasons why we did the book in the first place and talked
Yeah.
about this a lot, because this sort of word hybrid sometimes makes me crazy because it only focuses on like the most narrow aspect of flexibility,
Right.
like how many days a week somebody needs to be in the office. Time flexibility, schedule flexibility is a big deal, and it's a big deal for every worker.
Mm.
So you get these statements from CEOs that are things like, we need to be back in the office in solidarity with our frontline workers, right? And when you ask frontline workers, they really don't care. They really don't care whether or not what not office workers are in the office or not. What they want is they want flexibility in their schedules.
Right.
They want the ability to swap a shift more easily with a coworker when they need to deal with a doctor's appointment. They want more fractional shifts. They want more control over their lives as well. And if you can give them that kind of flexibility, you can also attract and retain more of them. And by the way, from a frontline worker perspective, employers are really having a harder time attracting and retaining those people than
Right.
they are office people.
Right.
So you really should think about this as, how do I provide equity, not equality? How do I provide equitable solutions that allow flexibility for my frontline workers in the same way that I'm providing flexibility for my office workers? But it's going to come up with a different set of solutions when you do that.
Right. One of the big things that perhaps we missed originally in the debate, and so I remember writing an article towards the end of 2020 before the vaccines had come out. I was like, this is not an issue of flexibility. It's
Yeah.
what people want is flexibility and agency,
Yeah,
which
that's right.
means for them to decide
That's right.
where, when, how they get work done to the best of
Yeah.
their abilities, right?
I
And
think
somewhere we sort of missed that agency part in all the conversation that was hijacked by flexibility.
that's right. I think it comes down to choice, and that's what people are looking
Yeah.
for on a consistent basis. They've got some degree of autonomy and choice
Right.
in what and how they work. You can look at data even out of like Cushman and Wakefield has some great data around this that says if you take away choice from people, that's actually the big thing that drives down their level of engagement. When
Yeah.
we looked at this in Future Forms data, it was the same sort of thing. It wasn't give me, a literal like number of days. It was like, do I have a choice in doing this? I do think there's an important piece to unpack there, though, and that's top-down mandates clearly don't work. They drive, no financial benefit, and they just burn out employees. But
Right.
individual choice, full individual choice also really doesn't work very well because you
Yeah.
need teams to come to their own agreement about like what works for us as a team. If nothing else, because most people want to be together with their team, a day or two a week.
Right.
So if nothing else, you got to figure out like what days and for what purpose are we coming into
Yeah.
the office.
And
And
what's
so
the purpose of the office?
yeah, exactly. And the purpose becomes about that collaboration
Right.
and connection, not about heads down work. So
Yeah.
the most effective programs that I've seen have involved people figuring out, like at the business unit and then down to the function and down to the team level, like
Right.
what are the anchoring events that bring us together? That's how you get people aligned because they understand then the trade-off.
Yeah.
And the choice is when I'm doing my heads down work, where do I want to do it from? And give
Yeah.
people that level of autonomy.
Yeah. And to your earlier point, I think the paper coming out of University of Pittsburgh by Markma and Uding, I think, is just
Yeah,
fantastic in helping us understand the lack of financial impact, I suppose, of remote work. Coming back to the office does not
yeah.
increase financial performance in any shape or form.
Yeah, exactly. And if for those that haven't read that report, it's fantastic. You should look it
Yeah.
up. Mark Ma is all over on LinkedIn with it. But the S&P 500, they looked at, how those companies that have actually in that S&P 500 that put in mandates, how they've performed, zero impact on financial performance. But what it did is you look at their Glassdoor ratings and they
Right.
plummeted, which is not a great thing to see if you
Not a
also are
great thing
trying
to see.
to retain talent.
Including on culture, which was a
That's right.
surprise, right?
That's right. That's
So
right.
we'll talk more about that. Let's go to
That's
the
right.
second question.
Oh my gosh, do it.
This is a headline that says remote work kills productivity. So these headlines and CEO rants give us the impression that remote work impacts productivity negatively,
Yeah.
and the office is the place to do our best work. So fact or clickbait?
Clickbait. There have been a couple of studies that show that remote workers were less productive, but the couple of studies are largely, one of them in particular was IT workers in India in
Yes.
2020. And I led and managed a team of people who worked in engineering in India in 2020. It was a horrible year everywhere. It was a particularly horrible year for them because
Yeah.
their home and apartment setups, multi-generational, lacking good Wi-Fi infrastructure, lacking space, and real health and challenges around them,
Yeah.
obviously had a bad impact. The other study basically is an unmanaged experiment. At the same
Yes.
time, you can look at like
Oh
Nick
my God.
stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, just if
I
you
was
throw
about
people
that.
into it, yeah, if you throw people into it with no measurement of what outcomes you're trying to drive, you shouldn't be surprised that you see
And they were
some.
new joinees too, who had never been used to remote work at all.
There are plenty of studies though, like Raj Chowdhury out of Harvard
Yes.
Business School did one with the U.S. Patent Office
Yeah.
pre-pandemic that showed a 4.5% gain in productivity and same level of quality. Nick Bloom and team did one several years before that showed a 13% gain in productivity for remote work. The more recent stuff, especially stuff coming out of Raj Chowdhury, has been fantastic around
Yeah.
hybrid work. And
Yeah.
it sort of says something that I think we're all kind of gravitating to, which is about 25% of your time together with your team may be what's optimal in most cases, because that's where you're getting the highest degree of like quality of output, connection, collaboration. Raj's work showed that below 25% wasn't as good, and actually over 40% was worse.
Yeah.
So, pushing people back full time doesn't work, but there is actually a need to get teams together on a regular basis.
Yeah. And to your point, the purpose of why people come to the office has shifted.
That's right.
A lot of studies seem to suggest that you do better focused work,
Yeah,
potentially at home
that's
or
right.
wherever you might want to work from. And the collaborative work, what 83% in some survey, right, talk about wanting to come back to the office for
Right.
collaborative endeavors, not
That's right.
necessarily to, establish their presence in the office for their managers. So
That's
talk a
right.
little bit about how do we enable people to do their best work if it is that people want different things from different places in
Yeah,
terms
and I think part of that is thinking about what's common across people.
right,
And for most people, the desire to come into an office and to be together is centered on three things. First and biggest is relationship building and socialization and
right,
connection, right? Second is personal development and mentorship. Like there's not that mentorship every time needs to be in the office, but there's a little bit of like, bring me together for a learning event and I see purpose behind
right,
it and I've got a way
right,
to connect with other people. And the third is for a lot of people, it's kind of like complex problem solving, right?
right,
Maybe it's the kickoff of a new project. Maybe it's something we've been struggling with for a while where we just need some immersed time together to do it. Those three are pretty common. What you then need to do is figure out for the team that I'm working with, based on how distributed they are,
right,
what's the right frequency to bring them together to do those things. For a very broadly distributed, like product and engineering organization, that might be once a quarter for a week. That's heavily focused on, the socialization and the relationship building. For a early in their career sales team, inside sales, take the other side of
yeah,
it, this may be the kind of thing where you do want to have 2 or 3 days a week that are in the office, where every week you're doing a similar pattern of things around things like training programs, show and tell, mirroring exercises, pipeline reviews. That's just much more, higher frequency and interaction. So it's like you take that same level of things that most people want to do together, and then you figure out like how does that pertain to our particular team's needs and such situation.
Yeah. And what you're saying is so true. And leadership is important as well, right? Because
Yeah,
if I think about it, right, I haven't managed or led a co-located team in 20 years. They've
same
always
here.
been distributed, different countries, different continents, but it takes a different kind of skill set as a
Right.
leader to
That's
be
right.
able to have this team be effective.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we are helping our leaders to get to that point, well enough. And so, what's your perspective on that, Brian?
I think that's a huge issue, Shoshana. Like you and I both had the same experience, 20 years of,
Right.
it's been at least 20, 25 years since my team all, worked in the same city, let alone the same building.
Right.
And so you learn to be a much better communicator. You learn to be much more, clear about the outcomes and priorities and what we're after. You learn to use the digital tools as well as in-person events to actually build collaboration and connection between people. But most managers haven't been trained in doing this.
Right.
During the pandemic, and even as we're coming out of it, I co-led a set of executive working groups with my partner at BCG, Debbie Lovich, and we had groups of chief human resource officers, chief people officers, and almost to a person, everyone's main concern was, have we given enough training and support to
Right.
frontline managers to know how to manage this? And that's become an even bigger issue. Teams are way more distributed post-pandemic than they were
Right.
beforehand. Microsoft's number for 2023 was like 75% of teams have members that are spread
Wow.
out across multiple cities, right? And
That's
so that
amazing.
means the weight on those managers is a lot higher to figure out how to lead those teams. The good news in all this to me, though, is that set of skills. How do I make sure I have weekly one-on-ones with everyone on my team and
Right.
I know how to run a one-on-one? How do I have weekly team meetings that are stitching everybody together,
Yeah.
across, time zones? How do
Yeah.
I make sure that I am clear about what our priorities are? Those are just important skills to have no matter what. And they're all
Yeah.
so much better than falling back on I manage by walking around, right? I manage by, monitoring whether or not Annie and Jack are both, sitting in their seats. That type of management was never actually a success in the first
It was
place. It was
never a
just
success.
the lowest common denominator of what was possible. So what we're asking people to do is harder, and we need to support them in doing it, but it's going to drive a lot better outcomes. My favorite question to all of them is, tell me about the outcomes of your business.
Yeah.
Where are your results lagging? Where are you having problems and challenges? Now let's dig in there and figure
Yeah.
out, what's driving those sets of challenges.
Right.
It may be that you need some people to be together more often,
Yeah.
but my bet is there's a lot more complexity underneath the answer to
Yes.
that than simply, force marching people back into an office.
So true.
This podcast is brought to you by Just Human. We offer a broad range of leadership development solutions, including mindful leadership workshops and executive coaching. To learn more, visit us at justhuman.io. And now, back to the podcast.
Third one.
All right.
They have no attachment, no passion, no creativity. This is a statement by a Fortune 500 CEO.
Yeah.
Uh, he's not alone, though, right? We
Yeah.
know this. Many CEOs tend to believe that serendipity at the water cooler is the fountain of innovation, right?
Oh,
Rant
man.
or clickbait.
The water coolers are just these miraculous things. Water coolers and whiteboards, just like the
I
fonts
don't
of
get
in,
it.
like I go to a water cooler and innovation spouts out of it. If you here's where the research gets interesting. If you dial back 50 years, if you look at studies actually even further back than that, 1950s, 1960s, there is evidence that people who were co-located were more innovative because they bounced ideas off of one another.
Yeah.
There is recent research, and I should actually post this one. I've seen it from a couple other people that shows this trend line that says it was worse, it was worse, it was worse. It's about the same in 2000, 2010. It's a negative, right? And what's going on there is we've ignored the fact that distributed teams have happened for 20 years now, that we've had people that we've had to plug in and bring together through digital tools for a couple of decades. And for the past 5 to 10 years, the quality of those tools has skyrocketed in terms of your ability to share information, knowledge, and work together. What drives innovation isn't co-location, it's actually psychological safety. There's tons of studies out there that show, and we did this too at Future Forum. We did a study in 2019 where we looked at team innovation and whether you were co-located 100%, some form of hybrid or fully remote,
Yeah.
zero correlation, like no
Wow.
impact whatsoever. If you said that your team was willing to take risks and that you felt safe asking questions,
Mm.
your team was 50% more likely to be
Right.
more innovative than not. That's psychological safety.
Yeah.
And so what I try to do with a lot of executives is say, hey, look, let me give you an alternate route here, right? Which is instead of relying on random chance to be the driver of innovation in
Yeah.
your organization, let's think about how you design for it.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example around like brainstorming. One of my favorite concepts is brainwriting.
Yeah.
Give the people who you're going to bring together the prompt, the data, the insights, the whatever it is, a week ahead of time. Tell them to take at least 2 hours going through it and jotting down their top 3 to 5 ideas.
Right.
Do not share it ahead of time. When you come together, throw all those ideas into a common document or onto a whiteboard. Now talk about it. Because
Right.
what that does is it allows the introverts the opportunity to think about it and create
Yeah.
their ideas. It gets ideas out of the new people, the people who don't look like me. It generates more ideas, more good ideas and more bad
Yeah.
ideas. And it avoids the groupthink that usually happens in those sessions.
Yeah.
That drives innovation. That's going to get you more new ideas. Water coolers, not so much.
It's also so interesting. I remember reading this in Humanocracy, which is a fantastic book. They bust this myth about innovation as well. They talk about the fact that it's not that the ideas are fewer, but more ideas get killed as it goes to the next level of management. So
Yeah,
it's almost what you said, right? Which is how do you ensure that people have the psychological safety, but also the support of their managers to
yeah,
make sure that ideas don't die as and when they're born, but that they have some oxygen to
that's right.
survive and grow and become something really big.
I know that if you're working in an organization where the CEO says these people have no attachment, no passion, no creativity. By the way, this is L'Oreal's CEO. I know who it is.
Yes,
Um,
it is.
if, by the way, if you also then say, by the way, I need you to come in on Fridays, at least twice a month, in order to get more innovative, I think there's a sizable portion of your workforce that's going to sit there and say, your concern is not my innovation. Your concern is
Yeah,
that you don't think I'm really working and you don't trust me.
yeah,
And that lack of trust is a major issue because a lack of trust actually does the exact opposite. It
exactly.
actually drives down someone's willingness to put in extra hours
Yeah,
and extra effort. There's this doom loop of quiet quitting and return to office things, right? As a
yeah,
CEO, I'm afraid that all the people who are not coming into the office are quiet quitting on me. So I
yeah,
mandate and say they've got to be back in the office, which signals to them that I don't trust them, at which
right.
point they start quiet quitting on you. They're going to do the minimum, right? There's a
The
story
exact
the other
thing
day
we
I
were
loved.
hoping to avoid.
Yeah, there's a story the other day that I loved where somebody said we got told that we had to be in the office 5 days a week. We had to be there from 9 to 5 because that's where work got done. And so on Thursday night, my manager messaged me and said, "Hey, I need this urgently." And I
Yeah,
replied back and said, I've been told work only happens in the office from 9 to 5, right? We've violated this a long time ago. 9 to 5 in the
yeah,
office has not been a thing for decades.
yeah.
So we kind of need to get over it.
This lack of trust that you're talking about is actually such an important thing here because it leads to different solutions that then companies are deploying, right? Because it results in companies wanting surveillance software. They want to track what their employees are doing, track attendance, and have managers chase people. It just sounds
Yeah,
like focused on the wrong things here. On the other end, you have employees who just are unhappy, right, about
yeah,
being surveilled in this manner. And so you have stuff like mouse jigglers
that's
that
right. That's
help
right.
people, and soon by the year end I think some companies announce we'll have an AI avatar that can attend meetings for us. So
Yeah,
who's winning, right, by both of these whether it is leaders or their people doing these different things that again don't move the conversation forward at all.
yeah. Monitoring always consists of monitoring activity, and activity can be gamed with a mouse jiggler or something like that. Look, there are good reasons to measure office utilization, right?
Yes.
There are good reasons to also be able to sit there and say things like, hey, internally, how do I start looking at my office utilization, literally like the physical utilization, because most companies haven't done the thing they need to do, which is reconfigure to
Right.
address the current needs.
Right.
But also to look at things like if this team has an agreement in place that says they should be together X times, are they doing it and what impact is that having on their employee
Right.
engagement? There's real value in trying to tie together my employee engagement data, my office utilization data, and my outcomes data.
Yeah.
It is not easy to do, and we've never really done it in the past. But if you can, I think there's value in that. But that's very different from I'm monitoring Susie and whether or not Susie is
Yeah.
coming in the requisite number of days a week, because that just signals to Susie that all you care about is her appearance and her attendance, not her
Yeah.
output.
So true. Fourth one.
All
So this
right.
one is again by a CEO, says, as a CEO, I worry about the erosion of office culture with remote work. These comments give the impression that culture can only be built in person in the office.
Yeah.
Culture is built automatically when people come together. It's like contagion, right? It somehow transfers to everyone in the office and that on that particular day. Fact or clickbait?
Clickbait, complete clickbait. I think the challenge here is that executives, a lot of them like myself, grew up and experienced, decades of you did build culture by going and doing the all hands. You
Yeah.
yourself liked being in the office. You were there all the time. And that's what you got used to in terms of how you built it. Future form data last year was showing that like people that have flexible work situations were 57% more likely to say that their culture had improved over the past couple of years. Flex Index and BCG just put out a study last month on
Yeah.
exactly this topic. They looked at Glassdoor ratings, and Glassdoor ratings were sizably higher for
Yeah.
companies that were fully flexible or even hybrid than fully in person in terms of culture related issues and people's, do people feel aligned with values?
Yeah.
For one of the things that as leaders we all need to understand is that culture isn't the slogans you put on the wall and the happy
Oh,
hours. Culture really shows up in how you treat people, right? It's what do you prioritize, what do you resource, and who and what gets rewarded. That's how people know and feel what a culture is really like. So
yeah.
if you've got an organization that's centered on we hold people accountable to outcomes, but we trust them to get the work done, that's a positive culture that also drives better outcomes, as opposed to our culture is we say all these words over here
Yeah.
that we value our employees, but then we
Yeah.
act in this sort of weird way that says, but we don't trust you, right? So culture is really about the what you do, not the
Yeah.
slogans.
Next one.
Got it.
I promise you this is the last one. So, a KPMG study found that about 90% CEOs are likely to reward employees who make an effort to come into the office with favorable assignments, raises, and promotions. It blows
Yeah.
my mind, but
Yeah.
it gives the impression that they're willing to translate their proximity bias into decisions and actions
Yeah.
that impact people adversely. Isn't that discrimination?
Yeah. It definitely feels like it and can seem like it. And I think it's my hopeful take is it's a lack of awareness as opposed to a lack of, or
Yeah.
as opposed to intent. This is one of the ones that's not really clickbait. It's a real problem and a real concern.
Yeah.
There's still not great evidence either way that it's happening, but I think we all are right to be very concerned about it.
Yeah.
The data, you know it, I know it, most people probably listening to this do, but just in case, women, caregivers, people of color, people with disabilities, people who are neurologically different, all have stronger preferences for flexible working,
Yeah.
right? And that's been true. One of the discoveries that we had back in 2020, or like one of the first things that showed up in our research, and it's been consistent ever since.
Hmm.
And so if you are saying get back to the office and I'm going to reward people who are in front of me, which is proximity bias, with opportunity and promotions, you are inherently biasing those promotions and those rewards to people who are white, male, older, not caregivers, people who look like me. And that's a real problem. It's not just a real problem societally, which it is. It's
Yeah.
actually a problem from a long-term organizational performance perspective too,
Yeah.
because monocultures long-term don't succeed, right? If you are simply, copy pasting the same human over and over and over, you may be very successful at getting aligned and marching in a common direction really fast. but eventually you're going to miss a shift in the market or a growth
Yeah.
opportunity or major change that's going to knock you sideways.
So true. And it impacts innovation, the thing that they seem to care
Exactly.
about.
Exactly. The better answer to the water cooler question is have a diversity of thinking and backgrounds and perspectives in your organization that you listen to, as opposed to get them to huddle
Yeah.
up around a water cooler.
What's alarming, I think, in this whole debate, and you called it out a bit ago, is unintentional, I'm going to say, a gap between, what organizations and CEOs are saying versus what they're doing, which is sometimes often the opposite, right, of
Yeah,
what they intend. And
yeah,
so, you talked about it from a trust perspective. We're taking these actions and calling people back to the office. We know it impacts trust. We think we want greater trust, but it's having the opposite effect or engagement for that matter. It's the same thing for they say they want diversity, it's important, but want to end flexibility despite knowing that it
yeah,
truly matters to women, to moms, to parents, to Black, African American, Hispanic, Asian talent, neurodiverse, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. The list goes on, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Or they say they value employee feedback, except when it comes to providing flexibility and agency that people seem to really care about.
Yeah,
Or they say they care about burnout and overwhelm and mental health, but
yeah,
are against flexibility, the one thing that's proven to help. It feels like we're focusing on the wrong things, right? And
yeah,
missing really critical issues in the
yeah.
bargain. So, could you tell us what are the most important issues that we should be focusing on for the future of work?
Maybe the better place to start is clarity of outcomes,
Yeah.
right? And this is a thing that I've worked in enough small companies and big companies to see it again and again. It's really hard work as an
Yeah.
executive leadership team to get aligned on not just what are the most important things, but tell me what are the three most important things. Put them
Mm.
in rank order and tell me how we're going to measure our success against them over the next 6 months.
Yeah.
And use that as the focus lens and also be willing to say no to a bunch of other stuff. If you can start there, if you can start saying, hey, as an organization, this is what's most important to us. These are the goals, these are the outcomes. And you can bring that down into your organization to talk about the results we need this team to drive. What you're doing is you're creating a system that starts looking at accountability, that starts looking at we need people to be able to rely on one another. We need to build trust on that basis, and that has a more level playing field. Because if that's what your main focus is as a leader, you shouldn't worry as much about how, where, or when the work gets done. You should be worried about, whether the results are being driven. If you can start there, you can start layering in all the rest of the stuff that we know is important to people.
Mm.
I don't think that giving people access to meditation apps is going to solve their burnout problem.
So here's an organization who wants to translate vision they have into strategy and then into outcomes that the team needs to deliver, right?
Yeah.
And you were advising them on what to do for the future of work. What would be three things that you would ask them to focus on?
The starting point is listening to your own people.
Yeah,
That's always the right starting point, is listening to
true.
your own teams about what's holding them back, what's working and what's not working. Every time that I've done this with companies successfully, it's involved
Yeah.
pulling together a representative task force that cuts across the
Yes.
organization, right? And usually it's most effective if it's people that are sort of widely respected within the organization
Right.
from above and from below,
Yes.
because they've probably been around for a while. They know how things
Right.
work, right?
Or
And
don't.
they also, yeah, exactly. And they know what's broken. We did this at Slack to a large extent, and I've done it and I've supported task forces in other organizations. The executives themselves are both a little bit too distant and honestly too busy to try to tackle all of this. But
True.
you also can't figure all of this out through just surveys itself, right?
Exactly.
So, what are you doing to bring together a group of people that can help you sort out things like, what are the needs of different teams? Do we have issues around things like the workplace design is no longer appropriate for us because everybody's coming in and finding there's no meeting rooms that the
Right.
teams are trying to come together? That's a pretty clear one. Are they feeling like we're having problems because we just have an overabundance of meetings? And we
Right.
need to address that by training ourselves to do more things asynchronously.
Right.
It's basically figuring out where those biggest pain points are,
Right.
pick one or two of them, and just start working on it.
Yeah.
We did this with Slack itself around things like the office reopening and figuring out team agreements about frequency of people coming together. But then within, I think, a quarter, we shifted our time towards getting people more focused time, right? we could trace back burnout levels. We could trace back employees' intent to stay, to whether or not they felt like they had enough time during the workday to get their job done. And so tackling that became much more important than tackling whether or not the workspace design was appropriate or not. So listen to your team, focus on critical issues, get a group together that can actually help drive that forward. Last thing I'll add to that is that requires investment. Your leadership team has to be willing to commit resources to this, right? The time and attention of that task force itself, but also your HR team, your internal comms team, your workplace team need to be able to put resources into experimentation, iteration, communication if you're going to move forward.
Such great advice, Brian. Such great advice. Can you share maybe an example of someone who's doing this really well?
So I think there's a lot of great examples out there. Atlassian's a great one, and just sticking with the A's, Airbnb, Allstate, but tons of companies, HubSpot, ServiceNow, NVIDIA, American Express, Cisco, like just tons and tons.
Yeah.
Allstate's a great example though, because people don't think about financial services companies necessarily in this light.
True.
They got rid of the corporate headquarters. They now have 7 regional centers. They have sort of boundary conditions, like every team should be together at least once a month. You have to live within a commutable distance of where your team gathers. So it's kind of treating you as an adult and you have to do it.
Right.
But they know that the needs, for example, of the marketing analyst team, which comes together once a month for 3 days for training, is very different from the needs of the marketing content design team that's in the office 3 days a week, because they're dealing with visual elements that they want to be able to look at together, touch, feel, and see. So team level agreements are a big part of this. Supporting people with both space and technology are a big part of it. And having guardrails, right? Principles about the importance of flexibility and guardrails about minimum and maximum time together carries people a long way.
Such a great example, Brian.
In part 2 of this conversation, Brian shares his leadership journey and why it is so important to him to fight the all-pervasive fiction and clickbait on future of work with data and evidence. He also predicts who won the RTO battles. You don't want to miss this. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Mindful Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Just Human. We are a growth accelerator for our clients, helping your people and businesses thrive through human-centered, ecosystem-based people solutions. To learn more, visit us at justhuman.io and schedule a 30-minute free call with us.